Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Medtech, the premier podcast for the medical device and diagnostic industry. My name is Omar Ford, and I'm editor-in-chief of MD+DI. I'm also the host of Let's Talk Medtech. We've got a great episode lined up for you today. I'm joined by my colleague, my longtime friend, Amanda Pedersen, who is senior editor at MD+DI. She is also a two-time Neal Award winner. She's also been a three-time finalist. So this is an incredible conversation. We're going to be talking mid-year trends. I know we're a little bit past the middle of the year. Hey, cut me a little bit of slack. It's been a lot going on, but we're going to be discussing everything that's been happening in 2025 and what are some of the trends and some of the things that we can expect for the latter half of the year. And it's just such a great conversation. And we're going to get some insight from Amanda, who from time to time will host the Let's Talk MedTech podcast. So without further ado, let's talk MedTech with Amanda Pedersen. Well, Amanda, thanks for taking the time to talk and be on Let's Talk MedTech. I know that you have a tremendously busy schedule.
Well, thank you, Omar. It's good to be back on Let's Talk MedTech. It's been a minute since I've been on the show, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we have worked together, and I know a lot of people don't know this, but we've worked together, since 2007. I mean, I
Yeah.
think your son was an infant at that point.
Well, actually, he was born in 2008. I met you when I was pregnant with him,
Oh,
so,
wow.
and he's
Wow.
17 now.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's amazing. And yeah, and I've since gone on to, well, my wife has had three children. So my
Mhm.
youngest is what, 16 months now. So, I guess
Yeah.
we didn't stop. We didn't learn that lesson. But my question, let's get back to it. My question for you is, you've been covering this industry, the medtech industry, since 2007 or 2000, 2006, 2007, roughly that area.
Mhm.
With your vast experience, how would you describe 2025 for the medical device industry?
I think 2025 has been a year of both whiplash and breath holding. And I say that because we started out the year covering tariffs. We continue to cover tariffs. I know the industry is watching that closely as well. And it seems like the tariff policies coming out of the White House in particular are changing almost near constantly. And and that, of course, has triggered changes in retaliatory trade policies coming out of other countries like the EU and Canada. So medtech companies might have experienced a bit of whiplash, especially early on in the year as they tried to forecast what their year was going to be like financially and how the ever changing global trade landscape was going to impact their bottom line. It's also felt like a lot of breath holding as we've seen staff changes happen at FDA. And the broader Department of Health and Human Services. And I don't think we know quite yet how those changes are going to impact regulatory timelines and other aspects of doing business in the industry. So I think both kind of whiplash and a lot of people just sort of holding their breath and waiting to see what happens.
There's a lot of uncertainty, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's kind of the buzzword that I've heard from several sources. There's a lot of uncertainty around the industry. How can you forecast budgets when you don't know how tariffs will impact you?
Right.
And also with just the turnover with the staff changes, you talked a little bit about this, but there was a lot of back and forth. I feel with FDA, some of the staff was let go, then some had to be rehired. Then, if I'm calling this correctly, some more were let go. So it just
Yeah,
has created this volatile nature for the medtech industry. Yeah.
I
So
agree.
yeah. So with that being said, what are some of the other headwinds in the industry that you've been seeing, and how are these headwinds different from previous years?
Well, I think I think tariffs really are the biggest headwind.
Yeah,
So I don't know that it's different or another headwind. But with that comes overall the overall headwind of supply chain challenges and companies making big decisions regarding whether they're going to reshore, whether they're going to diversify their manufacturing footprint. Some of the larger OEMs are fortunate in that they already have manufacturing plants all over the world and they can just sort of localize those and sort of tackle the problem from that perspective. But the smaller companies might not be as fortunate. And so they have a lot of big decisions to make and how much they can invest into addressing this problem.
interesting, interesting. Yeah, I know Abbott Laboratories was talking about what they were doing with the Freestyle Libra, with their continuous glucose monitor, and they were saying how, and I will definitely get this wrong if I try to remember the correct number, but they're trying to localize some of the manufacturing, depending on
Mhm.
the region for the CGM. So if they have an area in Europe or in the EU that they're manufacturing the CGMs. Those CGMs will just go to the EU,
Right.
and in the US, those CGMs will just go in the US area. So, the larger companies can afford to do that, but the little guys, they can't. And so it'll be
Exactly.
interesting to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and I don't know if this is a headwind, but we've also seen a lot of just a trend that we've seen, especially recently. I know you and I have talked about this to some extent, is the divestitures and spinoffs.
Yep.
And I think it'll be interesting to see how newly formed companies that come out of those spinoffs, how they fare on their own, and what
Mhm.
the medtech landscape ultimately looks like at the end of the year or even this time next year. But for the larger OEMs, I think they're starting to realize that they must get smaller to get bigger, and that
Mhm.
makes a weird kind of sense.
It does, it does. And I remember something similar happened around the beginning of the pandemic, right? You had
Mhm.
Becton Dickinson spun out Embecta. You
Mhm.
also had oh gosh, it's slipping my mind. There was another company. Do you recall there was another company that did a spin?
GE Healthcare spun out of
Yes.
GE, and I don't know exactly what the timeline was on that, but that's another big one we've seen in recent years.
And Zimvi from Zimmer
ZimV,
Biomet. That's the one that I was
yeah.
trying to remember.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and then the company ZimV that spun out of Zimmer Biomet, they've since done a pretty major divestiture of their own. So they got small, and then they got even more smaller, even smaller, or I should say, perhaps a better way of saying that is more focused
Yes.
through portfolio management.
Do you think that ultimately that looking at the divestitures now, the ones that are just happening now, do you think that they're spinning out in a tough environment, or do you think that they'll be able to thrive? What are your predictions for that, looking at what we saw at the kind of at the beginning of the pandemic and how those spin outs fared?
Oh, I wish I had my magic 8 ball beside me, Omar, because I don't know, and I think that if I were to have my magic 8 ball, it's actually in my other office upstairs. But if I were to shake it, um, I think it would say outlook not so good, or maybe still deciding, or it's up in the air. I don't think that I'm not sure that there's a clear answer. Outlook murky. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head what the Magic 8 Ball says, what it spits out. But I hope they do well. I always hope that. You always want to see spin-off companies do well. Like, for example, one of the most successful spin-offs in medtech history was AbbVie spinning out of Abbott. And of course, we don't really cover AbbVie because we don't really cover pharma.
Yeah.
But it was I think it still is the most successful, if not one of the most successful spin-offs in medtech history. So you always want to see companies do that. I still have high hopes for Solventum, which spun out of 3M. I know that in the beginning of the year, some analysts were skeptical and kind of down on Solventum, but I have a lot of faith in their leadership, and that's because I covered Zimmer Biomet from the time that Brian Hansen became
Yes.
CEO, and he became CEO at a time when that company was just facing so many headwinds, so many challenges. It almost seemed like it was impossible, going to be impossible to turn it around, but he did it, and he set a time frame and achieved that even ahead of some of those milestones that he had laid out. So I think with Brian Hansen at the helm of Solventum, I think that they're going to do well. And so I have faith in them, but it'll be interesting to see. Just have to wait and see, I guess, on some of these new divestitures and spinouts that happen.
All right. Well, we've been grim for a little bit. So let's lighten it up just a tad. What are some of the trends, some of the other trends that you're seeing in 2025, and which of these excites you the most?
Well, I think that one sector, I don't know that it's a trend so much as
Sure.
just a sector that stands out, is diabetes tech. And it has stood out for a while. That's not anything new, but I think that the companies in that space are doing really well. I feel like Insulet, sorry,
Yep.
just got a fabulous new CEO in Ashley McAvoy, who
Yes.
came, of course, from Johnson Medtech. And the company recently teamed up with Marvel. I know that's something that'll excite you, Omar, as I know you're a big comic book fan. Um, and they created a superhero and a one-off comic book. There you go.
Yes, there you go.
One-off comic book centered on a teenager with type 1 diabetes who also happens to have strong interests in science and engineering, and she's a female character. So I loved what they did with that. I loved that not only did they really highlight the the strengths of how the Omnipod 5 kind of became her superpower, kind of gave
Sure.
her the energy that she was lacking and the focus that she was lacking. And she became she became a stronger person. And then she has to take on this bad guy who's trying to spew negativity and control people's thoughts. And and I loved that they also showed a female character, a young female character with strong interests in the STEM categories, science and engineering and technology. So that's really exciting to see.
I like the fact, and forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like companies in the diabetes space, they get that you need to cross over to mainstream appeal. I'm
Yes.
thinking about Dexcom and I'm thinking about the Super Bowl ads that they
Mhm.
had. I'm just thinking about, you know, how a lot of diabetes tech companies are saying, hey, you know what? We need to reach the mainstream and get out
Yeah.
of the niche market. And this, the
Yeah.
Insulet in their partnership with Marvel, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to open a lot of doors and it's going to normalize talking about diabetes and also,
Absolutely.
yeah, and also just kind of really reinforce the technology and also normalize it too, because there are a lot of questions that people have once they develop diabetes or if they have a family member with it or whatnot, and they don't know. They need answers. And I think what these partnerships are doing is just showing us, hey, you can live a normal life with this, and this technology is normal and easy to use. So yeah,
Exactly. I agree. And didn't Ins was Insulet the company? I think you covered it a few years back. They had another really creative partnership.
Was it with Nintendo and Animal Crossing, I believe?
Yes,
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 yeah, and
yes,
I think
yes.
that was Insulet. I could be wrong, but I think that so they're really thinking outside the box, and that's great to see. And I think that recently, of course, Medtronic announced that they were getting out of the diabetes space. They're going to ideally spin off their diabetes business into a standalone company. And I think that what they realized, well, I think they realized a lot of things. I think it was that, that they have to um, manage their portfolio and find some focus, but also they realized that diabetes is very much a B2C um, business. It's business to consumer. So like you were talking about,
Yeah,
they have to reach that ma go through mainstream channels to reach the consumers, whereas the rest of their business is business to business, B2B,
sure,
business to
sure.
business. So um, I think that's what makes diabetes unique, and I think that's what's going to make the companies that really latch on to that um, more successful.
Yeah, yeah. The diabetes space, we've talked about this for years now. It is low-hanging fruit for a lot of tech companies to really come in and partner with some of these med tech companies. And you remember back in I want to say 2012, 2014, Google, before it was Verily, the life sciences division,
Mhm.
just teamed up with all these companies, including Novartis, Dexcom, and they were developing applications for the diabetes space. Now, some of those didn't come into fruition, but it says a lot that Google, which would Verily, the life sciences division would eventually become Verily, would invest and plop all of those resources
Mhm.
just into the diabetes space. So I found that to be incredible. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I agree.
All right. Well, let's talk now about some of the deal making activity. Now, we've talked about divestitures. We've talked about that aspect of it. But here's my ultimate question for you, because if people don't know this now, we're medtech nerds. We've been covering this for a long time. We know a lot of the history. I want to know your prediction on this. Are we going to see another Medtronic Covidien mega merger or mega deal? Do you think we'll see another one of those? I don't want to say in our lifetime, but do you think we'll
Yeah.
see one of those in the next few years, or was that kind of like a one time, a one off thing, you think?
I think we will, but not anytime soon. I think
Yeah.
we're looking more at like a decade from now, maybe sometime in the next decade, that we might see a big merger like that. But right now, it's more about pruning. So I think it's going to be a while before we see any really big. We did see some fairly decent sized deals early in the year, and
Mhm,
then it
mhm.
seemed like it kind of tapered off. So I'll be really interested to see the numbers. I know we've got an analyst that's working on that right now for us,
Yeah.
and I'll be interested in seeing those numbers when they come out, because I really don't know how healthy the
Yeah.
M&A, I'm not sure. It seems like a mix.
Yeah, it's hard to tell right now if it's healthy or if it's strong. I know that in 2023 it was completely dry, but I think everything was catching up from the pandemic. And 2024 was kind of more so a return to normal. But 2025, we've seen deals here and there, or we've seen, acquisitions. But, ultimately, it seems like they're either bolt on or it's a divestiture. Companies are
Yeah.
getting smaller to become stronger. So, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know when they talked about, it's something that comes up around the time of JP Morgan every year.
Hmm.
Analysts will kind of press CEOs to talk about their M&A appetite or strategy.
Yeah.
It seemed like a lot of them had a really strong and healthy appetite for M&A, but they also they made a point to say, tuck-in acquisitions
Yes.
were what they were hungry for.
Amanda, outside of outside of diabetes, are there any other sectors right now that are really standing out to you that are doing extremely well or really catching your eye that you're writing and reporting about?
Well, of course, we always talk about digital health, and we can't really ignore that. The artificial intelligence is really just changing the game.
Yeah.
It's almost like you made this statement at MD&M West that
Mm.
digital health is dead because it's almost like so much of medtech has embraced digital health technologies that it's not that much of a different sector on its own anymore. But um,
Normalized. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, but I think that that's healthy. AI is bringing big changes to the world, not just medtech, but certainly medtech is embracing it. And it's exciting, but I think it also is going to raise there's also going to be a lot of ethical considerations that come out of that as well.
Yeah. And we're just scratching the surface with that. I was having a conversation with a CEO the other day and a MedTech CEO, and we were just talking about just how things have changed now that we're introducing digital health applications, making devices smarter, adding AI. And he was just talking about how, now you really have to have a software engineer on
Hmm.
board. That, in addition to what you already have, that's just a given right now.
Hmm.
And you also have to think about cybersecurity. You have to think about protecting that information, that patient data that's going to be sent to the cloud or your server. So it's a fairly, I mean, it's a very different game from what it was when we started back in 2007. A lot of this was just I don't know. They were just it was just an idea. You couldn't fathom this. It existed in the tech realm, right? It
Hmm.
existed there in that industry, but healthcare, as you know, lags behind because of the strenuous regulatory environment, which it needs to be strenuous because you're talking about
Hmm.
patients' lives. But it's amazing to see just the level of cybersecurity that's going to be needed for these patients and this information. So we're truly
Yeah.
entering into a new age, especially when it comes to AI and digital health becoming normalized. And I caught a lot of
Absolutely.
flack for saying that digital health was dead too. I caught a lot of flack for
Did
that.
you?
Yeah, but I
Well, I
did
thought
it.
it made sense. I mean, it's a bold statement, but
Yeah.
once you realize what you were actually saying, it does, I think it made a lot of sense. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. 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 Your thoughts on, I got to bring this one up, pulsed field ablation. Your thoughts
Oh,
on
wow.
PFA on that space. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely, and I'm glad you brought it up
Yeah.
because, earlier when you asked me what other sectors are doing well, it completely escaped my mind. But yes, PFA, pulsed field ablation, that is one of the hottest spaces in med tech, and it's really exciting. It's going to do some really, I mean, it is helping a lot of patients in really important ways. And you've got some big players, Boston Scientific, of course, and Medtronic, Abbott. You've got all the big players, but there's a lot of, and I won't get into naming all of them, but
Sure.
there's also a lot of smaller private companies that are working in that space too. And I don't know if they'll ultimately go public and grow that way, or if their exit strategy might be to get acquired by one of these other guys. But um, I think that it's a really exciting space, and alongside with that is renal denervation,
Yes.
which that's been an exciting story because I remember being in San Francisco, sitting in a um, very overcrowded auditorium ballroom, while Omar Ishkar, who was CEO at Medtronic at the
Sure.
time, had to get up on stage and say, that their renal denervation study had failed.
Yep.
And so then we saw a lot of companies pulling out of the space. Well, if Medtronic can't do it, then how are we going to be successful? And
Yes.
and then man, what about 10 years later,
Mhm.
and they get it figured out and they get FDA approval, and they're not the only ones in the space. But suddenly renal denervation is successful, and so they really taught us a lesson in that resilience and just, not giving up, not throwing in the towel when everybody else thought they were going to throw in the towel. And there for a while, I even thought, "Oh, man, they need to just give this up. They're spending too many resources on it." But I was pleasantly surprised. It was, I like being wrong sometimes. And that was one of the times when I was pleasantly surprised and happy to be wrong and see them gain success in that space.
Oh, interesting. Well, Amanda, I know you got to get back to it. I know that you're pretty busy, but got to ask you this question. If there's one piece of advice that you could give to med tech companies when they're trying to get their story out there and trying to communicate with journalists, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, for us specifically here at MDDI, my advice is to familiarize yourself with the kinds of stories we do. And you wouldn't believe how many pitches I get for refrigerator manufacturing and technologies and things that are just completely, it's like, how did they even, get our name, so familiarize yourself with any publication that you're trying to target, whether it's MDDI or another publication. Familiarize yourself with the types of stories that they do, and and tailor your pitch that way. And one of the best ways you can familiarize yourself with content here at MDDI is to subscribe to our daily e-newsletter, which I'm sure you can put a comment or a link in the comments when this goes out, so
Yeah.
that people can easily find that subscription link. But that's the best thing. Other than that, I personally like to connect the dots between the news of the day and the larger picture. And so if you just send me a press release that like company A got FDA approval or FDA clearance for product X, um, I might not be as interested unless you can show me how this is part of a larger trend. Or sometimes I know that it's part of a larger trend and I'll reach out and say, I really want to talk about this larger trend here. And of course, mention the news, mention that you got FDA approval, but also how that fits into the bigger picture. So I think that when you're pitching, people in the trade media or B2B media, you really have to tailor your pitches to what kind of stories they do and make it connect to the larger picture.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Amanda, if anybody needs to get in contact with you, how can they reach you?
I'm going to say LinkedIn because
Yeah.
my email box, I lose. It's just a black hole sometimes. So instead of email, I'm more likely to see your message if you reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Amanda, thanks for coming on. Let's Talk MedTech. Really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Omar. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks once again to my friend, my colleague, Amanda Pedersen, Senior Editor of MDDI. Be sure to check out all of our content, including Petersen's POV and all the late breaking content that she develops surrounding the medical device industry at mddionline.com. That's mddionline.com. And be sure to also check us out for all of your medtech news at mddionline.com as well. And finally, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Let's Talk MedTech podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast.